Welcome. Guys, listen, we have an hour together, all right? And I want to maximize this time in two different ways. Number one, I want to make sure that I give you some content that'll generate some questions. And then I want to allow enough time for us to answer those questions, right? Because that way you can take some real value away from our time together. So I'm going to share essentially six different things, right? The three things that I think you can that I want you to avoid, so you can get the maximum output of what's happening in your industry right now. And then I want three things I would like for you to consider, right? So your company can thrive and hopefully survive, right? Considering what's happening in the market right now. So three things to avoid, three things to consider, and then we're going to have some Q&A, and then that'll be our time. All right. So the real question comes down to, where do we go from here? Right. We were asking ourselves that exact same question last year. As Steve just said, we run a sales presentation firm, and we were doing 100% of our work in person. And we had about 32 projects in about 3 different countries on the books, locked and loaded. Right. And 100% of that business got wiped off, right? Got completely eradicated. It was the hardest time I've ever experienced. And I had to turn the company around, pivot, find a new way to engage and train and teach these customers virtually all overnight. And it just about put me in the hospital. And so my point, though, is it is possible to thrive and survive despite very difficult conditions, right? Economic conditions. And we're also happy to be having a record year this year and signed with one of the largest athletic shoe companies in the world. So my point is, it's totally possible to make it happen, but it is difficult. It is difficult. I'm not saying that it's easy, but there's some things I'll share with you today, I believe can help you get there without a doubt. The question is, where do we go from here? So I'm going to bypass this piece here because he did an excellent job on the introduction. So there's no need to repeat. That toast, I love that graphic. I tried to become a .com millionaire in Silicon Valley. That's why I went there, because I grew up broke and I tried to become part of the .com millionaire explosion, and that didn't work. And that's what the toast represents. Did have a chance to write a book and do some cool things with some cool companies now. All right, enough about me. I want to spend this time on you. And I want to start with this quote that I'd like for you to consider as we move throughout this time together. Number one, strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. And tactics without strategy is just noise before defeat. So sometimes we have a strategy, which is, this is where we want to go, this is what we like to do, but it may be lacking the tactics, meaning how are we going to get there? And sometimes we have the tactics, the step by step, but it's not tied to a goal or a vision. We're not going anywhere in particular. It's just a bunch of activity, and that's just noise before defeat. And I want to invite you today to consider a strategy and the tactics that will line up with that strategy that will position your company in the best possible way. All right. But before we go there, I want to talk about the state of the union. What exactly is happening in our country today that severely, unfortunately, impacts your industry and your business? Now, this is level of community transmissions across the country. The red obviously indicating high transmission, meaning there's lots of growing COVID cases and lots of COVID cases. This is as of July 5th. And as we move forward, July 12th. So I want you to watch the red, what's happening in the red areas, right? So July 12th to July 19th. Now we're going to fast forward to August 2nd. Look at what's happening in our country right now. And this was about a week ago, August 9th. Almost every state in the country is being impacted with high levels of community transmission. So it's very clear from the data that this problem is not getting smaller, right? For sure. I think everyone can agree to that. The question really becomes, where do we go from here? What do we do about it? I don't think we're debating anymore whether the problem is getting worse or not. The real question is, what are we going to do about it? So if we take a look at this side by side, right, you can see the difference between just about a month, right, from July 5th to the 9th. And that's obviously the impact of the Delta variant and what it's having, the impact that it's having in our country. Next, you'll see this Wall Street Journal report. COVID-19 cases or hospitalizations are increasing for younger adults. Remember, the 30 to 39-year-olds are pretty much not even a story during phase one of the pandemic. Now that phase two has come, it's starting to hit even teenagers and even younger than that. In fact, in Dallas County, you guys may have heard, I'm here in Dallas, Texas, and in Dallas County over the weekend, they just announced that we have no available pediatric ICU beds in the entire area, right? Meaning if your child is deathly ill or some heart condition, etc., there are no ICU beds available. And if there were a bed available, there are no pediatric ICU nurses available to treat those patients. So it's getting really serious, right? And the question again becomes, how do we respond to it? On the right, you see cases are surging because students are going back to school. And we're now, even here in Dallas County, man, we got some, I don't know if you've seen in the news, just some really interesting things happening between the governor and the mayor and judges and schools, and people just really don't know what to do, right? There's a lot of fear and uncertainty involved, and that unfortunately creates a lot of volatility in the market. Now, I'm not here to rain on your parade, but we have to deal with truth. I love truth. The good book says, you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free, right? So we have to deal with truth. Otherwise, we're just not going to be making the right decision to put us in the best position to win. Now, I want to move to three things I want you guys to avoid as we move forward, right? Number one, there's some companies saying it's really not that bad, okay? I don't know where that comes from. I think that's how some people deal with fear, right? To be fair, some people deal with fear by avoiding it. That doesn't work really well in business. We might feel a little better about it temporarily. It doesn't do very well for businesses long term by assuming that it's not that bad, because the data and the science suggests that it is. Now, we're not to be overwhelmed by that. The question is, where do we go from here? What do we do about it? Now, for example, you guys remember the movie Titanic, and you probably remember this scene where the ship is going down and these guys are playing a song, right? They're continuing to play their music one last time. And personally, we never know what we would do in a situation like that. My guess is, if I know myself well, I will probably not be playing my violin considering the circumstances, right? And I would ask you in this scenario to not do the same. Now, here's how I would look at it. I don't fear what's going on in the market, but I do respect it, right? There's a very big difference between the two. I don't tend to walk in fear, but I do respect it, meaning I'm going to be paying attention to the facts and the truth and making adjustments accordingly. All right. No. So number one, let's avoid the scenario where we make the assumption that it's not that bad when it really is. Let's just deal with truth, right? And I want you guys to continue loading up the queue with questions, and we're going to answer some of those throughout, and then we'll have some time at the end to answer even more. Now, secondly, number one, remember, it's not that bad. Number two, wait it out. Now, this can be a strategy for some. I understand that. I know a business owner runs a $20 million healthcare company, and for 9 months, he just paid his employees. He went to his wife, asked for her blessing on it, and said, these people have been good to us. We love them. They love us. We're going to pay salaries for 9 months. And those folks really didn't do any work for those 9 months. But that was his strategy, right? He had enough in the bank to pay his team for that amount of time. And he said he couldn't go any further than that. But with a PPP loan and the cash that he had, he was able to cover it for 9 months. So some people can't wait it out. That may be a strategy. If you don't have a strategy, waiting it out may not be a good idea for you. Remember companies like Kodak and Blockbuster, right? They said, oh, it's really not that bad. We're just going to wait it out. And those companies don't exist anymore. And we don't want that to happen to you. So waiting out may be a strategy if you have the cash flow. Otherwise, we have to make some adjustments. And they may be a little bit uncomfortable, right? But I believe that's where growth happens. That's why companies win, because they make those uncomfortable adjustments. Now, number one, it's not that bad. We want to avoid that. We want to avoid waiting it out, and we have to avoid the fear and the frustration. Listen, I get it. It's incredibly difficult for the travel industry right now, especially for students and youth in the country that may be traveling through schools and youth organizations. It's incredibly difficult because this Delta variant seems to be affecting the younger generation more so than the first one. However, Fear and frustration will never be our best friend as it relates to pivoting our companies and moving forward accordingly, right? Now, I know I learned from last year, fear and frustration won't be a good help. I spent some time in fear frustration zone as all these things were happening last year. And not only did it's not good for the business, it's also not good for your marriage. My wife was like, brother, I'm going to need you to get it together. So, and eventually I did. I had a little moment. I just had a moment. All right. So remember, avoid saying that it's not that bad, and avoid waiting it out, and avoid allowing fear and frustration to settle into your team. One area where this
Brian,
creeps
that's
in.
fantastic. We have a question that's come in here, and you asked us to ask these during it. So a question is, how do I position my company as a resource for group travel without taking on additional liability? For example, I'm not saying that I'm safe, but saying we are doing everything that we can to make travel safe.
So how can you repeat the first part of the question?
Yeah, how do I position my company as a resource for group travel without taking on additional liability? How can we be doing everything we can to make travel safe as can be?
Okay, I admit that's really tough. Here's the truth. I like dealing with truth. You're not gonna be able to survive this storm with zero risk. Is that fair? Right? We're not going to be able to survive. Think about it. Any storm, any chaotic environment, any economic downfall, you're going to have to take some risk because the environment has created the risk already. And since we're in that environment, we're forced to assume some of that risk. I think your question is, how do I minimize the risk as much as possible? Because there's always going to be some risk. I'm going to share something. Oh, man, I was going to share this later, but maybe I'll share it now. I went to a website in my research and I was thinking, what travel industry is really getting this right? And I'm not going to say the company, but I went to this site and on their web, and I went to a few travel agencies, a few websites, and this one nailed it. And the other ones just seemed to have missed it. And when I go to their website, on the main page, on the home page, I see three things. And I think this answers your question, right? It says, how to travel worry-free by traveling with us. And they have three things. Number one is your well-being is our priority, right? And they make it very clear about protocols and masking and vaccinations. They're up to speed on that. And they say you're perfectly talking about the trip, what's going to happen on the trip. Point number two, basically, we're going to do all the things we've always done. They kind of just repeat all the successes and all the things that they've done in the past. And then number three is free changes and free cancellations. Now, I know that's a big one, but they're very sensitive to the market, right? It says free changes and cancellation because they know we see a lot of bookings, but we don't see a lot of deposits being made. Why? They don't think they can change or cancel, and they're afraid they're not going to get the refund, right? So they address the three biggest fears right out of the gate. They're not even talking about where they're going to travel and what they're going to do. They're dealing with the concerns of the market. So to answer your question, you want to minimize risk, find out what the market is concerned about, and then address those things specifically. Then get to travel and tourism and how, all the other things that come after that. And I will also add, they included a health and safety director on any tour over a certain number of people. And that director lives locally in the area that you're going to be traveling. They know all the health and safety protocols. They're following hospital guidelines, et cetera. They know they have access to 24/7 healthcare. All of these things are communicated very clearly and very simply on the website. And I have to say, I have a senior in high school. They have a trip planned to Orlando, Florida in the spring, I believe it is. And these are the concerns I would have as a parent, right? And they're dealing with those concerns up front. So how do you minimize risk? Is taking those risks head on. I'm going to be talking about this a little bit more tomorrow morning before you guys have your meetings. But the point is we have to identify the risk and then deal with them specifically and truthfully. If you can't eliminate these risks, be honest with people and let them know that, right? People love truth, especially in chaotic times. Why? Because truth is so hard to find nowadays. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. All right, so brief recap on the three things to avoid it's not that bad. If it's not that bad, then let's just deal with the truth, right? If the truth is it is bad, let's not fool ourselves into thinking that it's not. Number two, only wait it out if you can afford to do so. And number three, watch out for the fear and frustration. And one area in which that creeps in is through the news and the media. If you're constantly consuming the news, which usually means bad news, right? That can affect your psyche, right? That can affect how you see the world. So be careful, right? Allowing too much of that negative energy to come in and skew your perspective, and also can change the morale of your team and your organization, right? And I have an antidote to that coming up a little bit later. I'll help you give you something that specifically deals with that. So with that, those are the three things to avoid. Now I want to share this quick quote with you. Yesterday's keys won't fit in today's locks, right? So what you did in 2019 and what we did before, there's a really good chance it's not going to fit in today's locks. Why? The market has changed dramatically. And a lot of companies are trying to continue forcing old ideas and old paradigms and old things into this new market, and they just don't fit. And there are times where you might need a little more persistence or a little more time to get it through, but there are other times where the idea just doesn't work anymore. Yesterday's keys don't always fit in today's locks. And I share that with you because, as we work with companies within our own company, our own firm, we see that happening in the marketplace. We see companies trying to force old paradigms into a new and very different market. And in a lot of cases, it just doesn't fit. Now, I say that right before we jump into three things to consider. Now, first one is I want you to have a thermometer meeting, okay? That's where the tactics come in. I'll explain what a thermometer meeting is. You come into a meeting with your team and you have a whiteboard and you draw a thermometer on the whiteboard. And then thermometers have those little hash marks, right? As you discover big challenges in the marketplace and problems, we call it sales friction, things that create friction so that keep the sale from going through. Identify those things. And each time you identify one, you raise the temperature on the thermometer, right? So the more problems that there are, the higher the temperature is going to be on the thermometer. And you may have one really big problem that may take up 3 different hash marks and the temperature keeps rising, okay? That's how we know the truth, okay? The truth is on the whiteboard. Those are the challenges we're facing right now. And we all agree, yes, okay. Now, the second part of the thermometer meeting is how do we get the temperature down, right? We never want it to be too hot outside. I'm in Texas, right? It's August. Sometimes we get 105, 108 plus, et cetera, right? We never want the temperature too high outside or in our internal body temperature. So how do we bring the temperature down? So now we start talking about solutions to those very problems to get the temperature down. And as you have viable solutions to those problems, you begin erasing the temperature, right? Erasing the mark, right? Drawing the temperature back down. Now we have to move into execution. But at least we all know what the challenges are, and we all have potential solutions to those challenges, and we know how to move forward. We're all on the same page. Now we have synergy, morale goes up. We have strategy because we just talked about it. We have some tactics that we put in place. These are some things we can do, right? We assign them to different people in the room. Now we have a game plan to move forward. It's amazing at what this does to the synergy and energy on the team when you spend the time to do it. And it will take some time. This is not going to be a 30-minute meeting, right? It's going to take a little time, especially you'll notice lots of energy and momentum when the problems, because we identify the problems, the solutions part of the meeting, it may slow down a little bit, right? Let me give you a little clearer example of what that can look like for you, a thermometer meeting. So 2 things, right? Let's say, for example, if we were to have a thermometer meeting, we may list all the major fears that are existing in the market, for example, right? We'll just use that as an example. They have a fear of losing their refund, fear of their kids getting sick, and then there's just a general fear of the unknown. They just don't know what's going to happen, right? In fact, I'll go back to that website I was telling you about. One of the links, those 3 things that they made, the 3 points they made, one of them that you click, it has a frequently asked questions section, and I read them all. They all deal with fears and concerns that people have, right? And they're just dealing with them up front, openly and honestly. And it was beautiful to see because most companies don't like dealing with those uncomfortable truths publicly. So credit to them. Now, list those major fears. That's what raises the temperature. Then we want to drop the temperature by brainstorming, right? And don't limit your options. Be bold and creative, because in these kind of meetings, someone will say, hey, I have an idea. I was thinking we should. And then there's 2 or 3 people in the room that go, you know what? That's the craziest thing I ever heard. I would say, let's hear more of that. If that's the craziest thing you've ever heard, that may be the breakthrough idea. Remember, yesterday's keys don't fit in today's locks. So you're going to need a new key to fit into the new locks to discover new revenue in this new and very difficult marketplace. Okay? So don't be uncomfortable with the uncomfortable, because it's the uncomfortable that can lead to the breakthrough. So don't shut those people down. Now, there are some ideas, right? Let them all be heard, and we can all be considered part of the brainstorm. Just be open to ones that may sound a little quirky, because that could be where your breakthrough is high. So the 3 things to consider are: 1, your thermometer meeting. What does that look like? And what this potential outcome could be? You raise the temperature with all those major fears, and then you drop it down with solutions to those actual problems. Any questions or comments on that? Because I know that might be new for some. Fair enough. We'll continue. Okay. Now, the first thing, remember the thermometer meeting, that's where your tactics are going to be. Once you've had these meetings, now we want to talk about creating a fact sheet. Okay. What is a fact sheet? It's just what it says. The problem is, here's the thing: fears, anxieties, and concern rise in the absence of truth. So where there's not a lot of truth and there's not a lot of facts, our brains will just create our own truth and our own facts. And that's when this thing gets really squirrely, because now you got people coming up with all these wacky ideas and making up things on their own, because there is no truth. There's no source of truth. And so this is the opportunity for you to share with the market truth and facts, so they can make an educated decision on whether they want to take the tour or send the kids or not. Okay. Now, what does that look like? Here's some examples. Now, I'm a big believer in 1-pagers. Okay. Your fact sheet, if it's over 2 pages, is way too much, right? Because most people aren't going to read it. And we're big believers internally in our firm in infographics. Graphics and colors and charts, right? Not a lot of text, because people don't like reading those. Now, if you have a fact section, a frequently asked questions section, obviously you're going to have some text, but keep it simple. In fact, the website I was referring to earlier, they had the question in really big, bold text, and then short, punchy, bulletized answers. So you can quickly know what the problem is and quickly get to the answers. That could be an idea for a fact sheet for you. All right. So what is the state of the market for you? That's an example of a fact sheet. What's happening in the market? Like, what is going on? What trends are happening in different regions of the country? And how is that going to impact your decision to whether you're going to decide to do a tour or when you're going to do it? Okay. Secondly, what is your cancellation policy? And make sure it's customer focused. I've looked at some cancellation policies. I said, that's going to make everybody run from you 100 miles an hour, because the cancellation policy was built out of fear. And it's built to the benefit of the company and at the risk of the consumer. You want consumer-focused cancellation policies, right? So they're more inclined to want to do business with you, because you have to assume some risk in this case, right? Some people are trying to go at this with a zero risk opportunity, and no business is ever zero risk, right? And there's no way a customer is going to assume all the risk, right? They're just not going to do it. They're going to just call another company. So now I know there has to be a delicate balance there, but you want to get really creative in how you create your cancellation policy. I know I was looking for an Airbnb for my family, and I'm telling you, there were some cancellation policies that were really strict, that were like they were pre-pandemic. And you look at the booking, how you can check availability, and you see lots of availability. And you see others have adjusted their pricing down, made very friendly cancellation policies, and you click view availability, and you see very limited availability because they're getting bookings, right? Because it works. We have to deal with the fears that exist in the market, because all human beings are motivated for 1 or 2 reasons. All human beings, it's all psychology. They are either driven for one of two reasons: to seek pleasure or to avoid pain. And pain is the greater motivator in humans. So if the pain of not getting my money back, or the pain of my child getting sick while on a tour, if that pain is real and if that pain is high, they are not moving forward, right? I don't care what you do, they're not going to move forward unless you deal with those pains and you replace it with truth, right? Even if you're just honest and open with them by saying, listen, this is the state of the market. And as a result, this is how we're moving forward. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're not going to do. So at least they know where you stand, right? And they can make an educated decision accordingly. Now, just giving ideas on fact sheets, share some success stories on some tours that have taken place. Kids had a great time. Watch this video. No one got sick. No one got hurt. Everyone made it back okay. Share some success stories. They don't even have to be from your company. Think outside the box. You can share some success stories. The parent doesn't really care. They just want to know, are there successful trips taking place, right, in our area? Share those success stories. Call another company. If you don't have one, have the audacity to call a friendly and say, hey, how's it going? And if you find out that they're having success stories, listen to it. Would you mind if I just share that with some of our, and you may not want to list their company. If it's a friendly, right, they may be okay with that. Sure, man, go ahead and share other people. The more people know it's safe to travel, the more people will be traveling. It could benefit both companies. And this is going to be one of those times where you're going to have to partner with some companies. I understand it's competitive, but it's a tough market right there for the travel industry. And you're going to have to be creative and innovative if you want to thrive and survive in this very difficult market. Okay. There might be a new payment plan. That's another fact sheet you can put out. This is what our new payment plan is, where it's not as front loaded as it used to be, meaning smaller down payment. Maybe they pay a little later, right? Think of it this way. It's kind of like the auto industry, okay? There's a shortage on chips, right? Shortage on I saw car manufacturers have reduced capacity anywhere from 40 to 80% reduction in how many cars they're producing because there's not enough chips to put in the car. So they all run on computers now, right? Now, that industry had to make some massive adjustments. In fact, I was fortunate enough to buy a car during that time. And there were so many incentives that they were giving because they were trying to move these cars. They're very limited and they were trying to move these cars as fast as possible because they didn't want the inventory because it cost too much to keep these cars on the lots. And so we were able to take advantage of some really cool incentives as a result. What's the point? This is also a very difficult and very unique market, and it's going to take some creativity and innovation to move through it successfully. And then there's some other ideas, right? I was just kind of giving some examples. And speaking of examples, here's an example here on SYTA. Put this out. You guys may recognize this. There was a lot of, trepidation or misunderstanding around refunds and payment and how it works. So they put this awesome infographic, 1-page infographic, 5-star high five and a fist bump to SYTA. Fist bump, if I get my fist on there, fist bump to SYTA, because this is what the market is looking for. They want to know what's really going on. How does this world work? They only know they pay money, kids leave, and they come back and they had a great time, right? That's for the most part, most people's understanding. Well, this is called something we're going to talk about in a minute, market education. They're educating the market on how this world really works. Now they can make an informed decision. All right. Here's another example of fully vaccinated. You can see the chart, right? So the darker areas are areas that are where the area is mostly fully vaccinated. So 58% or more in the darker areas. So you can see from here, what is that? New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado kind of area, lots of heavy vaccinate. And then the very, very, very southern tip of Florida, highly vaccinated areas. Now, watch this next chart. And you can see highest rates of COVID, right, are in those lightly vaccinated areas. Market education. All we're talking about is market education, okay? This is put out, I think this is either Human Health Services or CDC, I forget which one. But if you look at these side by side, you can see the correlation, right? Really light areas all throughout the South. So Texas and Georgia didn't submit the numbers for some of that reason. So that's why those are grayed out. But as you can see, really lightly green areas all throughout the South translates to really dark areas in the map on the right, which represents really high rates of COVID. So what's the point? I'm not a politician and I'm not trying to make any political statement. This is just the facts as they appear on the screen, right? Now, I like truth. So I take this truth and I say, if I'm in the travel and tourism industry, I'm probably going to be making most of my trips in the Montana North area, the Northeast. Here you can see the Northeast, really, really low COVID, high vaccination rates, really low COVID rates. I share this information with my market and say, hey, I know we spent a lot of time in Florida in the past, but we discovered that yesterday's keys don't always fit in today's locks. So this year, we're going to be spending most of our time in the Northeast. Here's why, right? And we share this kind of information. Now, questions or comments. I want you to be sending those questions in the chat and I'll answer them in a second. But I really want to spend some time on that. And we're going to do that in just a few minutes here because I'm about to land the plane, people. All right. Last, I kind of mentioned this phrase before, market education. Okay. What does that look like? There's two versions I'd like for you to consider. All right. Internally, which person in your organization is responsible or which person on your team is responsible for market education, meaning they are following industry updates and trends, either good or bad, right? They're following the CDC on Twitter or local hospitals or school districts, school board meetings. Like, I know we follow our kids' high school on social media because they put out posts and announcements and things there. Who's following all, who's gathering all that data and staying so up to speed on what's happening in the market? And number three, obviously, is what's working, right? How do we pivot? How do we take advantage of these trends and industry updates and position ourselves in the best way possible, right? So internally, someone should be heading that up and they're reporting the information back to the team. And some of that shows up in a thermometer meeting when you're trying to find solutions to some of these challenges. Now, externally, once we gather this information, how do we share it with our market? Is it email blast, a one-pager being mailed out? Is a Zoom conference call? We're just giving an update, right? How do we reduce the temperature in the room to make people more comfortable to move forward with us? Okay, so it's a three-step process. You have your thermometer meeting, you have your fact sheet, and you have your market education. What does that look like when we put it all together? We've had this meeting. We understand the problems that we're facing as best we can, right? We have our internal person who's tracking all the data for the last few weeks, and they have a pretty good grasp on what's happening in the market, in the industry, and in our area. They've been on school board meetings. They've attended those. They know what's happening, what decisions are coming, right? Now, as a result of that, we can create our own fact sheet. We're going to have an internal fact sheet that we use where we have all the data in one place. And we have one we can put on our website or share with our clients and our market. And that creates awareness. And remember, the only way to reduce the fears in the room is to replace it with truth and facts. And that's what the fact sheet allows you to do. And the market education continues to do that over time. Now, does that mean we're going to fix every problem? No, what we're talking about is doing the best we can considering the circumstances. A very difficult market, but I believe we can survive this very difficult market if we make the right moves with the right strategy and the right tactics to support those strategies. Now, I'm going to land the plane with this quote. I'm a big believer in this quote. I'll share it with you. You can either step forward into growth or backwards into safety, but safety, unfortunately, is where companies go to die. This is not time to try to play it safe, right? At a minimum, just avoid those three things and try those three things and consider them. And let's just see what happens, right? See what happens. This is exactly what we did internally that allowed us to turn a corner the latter part of last year and definitely this year. And I invite you to do the same. Now, I'll press pause and see the next few slides. This is just kind of the four things that we do inside of our company, right? You know about the sales presentations and some other things. And implementing change readiness is something that may be more appropriate for this audience, considering all the massive change that you're going through currently. And yesterday's keys don't fit in today's locks, and that'll move us to the Q&A and discussion.